Hello, everybody. Do we have anybody in the room? Give me a fireworks if you can see me. Fantastic. Okay. Good morning. It's morning in Australia here. I'm going to start. In Australia, we have a practice of acknowledging our First Nations people before meeting, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I stand today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Cool. Yes, no doubt. Tim's session is very popular. Hey, Jace. Hey, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna jump straight into my presentation. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Hi, everybody. Okay, so you should be able to see effectively my screen now. You should be able to see Null Edge, and you should still be able to hear me. Give me some fireworks if you can still hear me. Perfect. All right, brilliant. I will jump over to my presentation and I will kick off. Let me get to the right slide first and then I will kick off. Okay. Have you ever wondered what happens the day that the last ServiceNow instance shuts down? G'day, my name is Kevin Clark and I've been in the ServiceNow ecosystem for about 10 years. This session is not a technical talk, but an invitation to encourage you to imagine what the world will look like on the day when Fred's final business rule runs. Now, as many of you know, this person here, Fred Luddy, founded ServiceNow in 2004. But what's interesting is that he wasn't just an entrepreneur or a suit, he was also a hands-on developer. In fact, a lot of the early code in the platform came directly from Fred himself. And one of the things that he wrote that year is still around today. His very first business rule is still visible in the platform. And that's where I want to start our journey. So this is it. Here it is. Fred's very first business rule, created on May the 5th, 2004. In the early days of ServiceNow, there were no script includes. Instead, you had what were called global business rules, which worked more or less the same way. These loaded across the whole platform, and anything inside them could be called from any other script. There's still quite a few of them floating around in the platform. Fred's rule was called string functions, very creative name, and inside of it was a very simple function just called trim. And all it does is remove white space from a string. It's not doing anything fancy, and it's a fairly standard kind of thing for modern JavaScript. But we can assume back in 2004, for whatever reason, due to JavaScript engine constraints or other constraints, Fred had to make his own version of this function. It's a tiny, almost throwaway piece of code, and it could have been replaced easily at any time. But it's been sitting there ever since, running quietly in the background of every ServiceNow instance for over 20 years. Now, the obvious question is Fred's little trim function actually still used? And it turns out that's kind of harder to figure out than you would expect, because JavaScript obviously has its own built-in trim function, which has been used extensively throughout ServiceNow. So if you go searching the platform for just the word trim, you'll find hundreds of results, and most of them are just the normal JavaScript trim. I went down the rabbit hole searching through all of them and eventually managed to pick out the places where Fred's version of trim is still being called. And honestly, there's not that many of them. It's used in about 3 places. After a lot of digging, here's where I found Fred's trim function still in action. Shows up in a few system properties, in some user record handling, and in scoped app records. And that's kind of it. It's not exactly mission critical. Every one of these calls of Fred's trim could easily be replaced with the native JavaScript trim function without anybody noticing. Fred's little rule is still hanging around, but at this point it's more of an archaeological relic than a necessity. Fred obviously has about 500 other artifacts in the platform, not to mention all of the stuff that we can't see in our PDIs and our instances, the underlying Java code. So putting that aside for the moment, what realistically would happen if if any of his code that we see on the platform, what realistically would happen? Could it realistically be replaced? Or are these artifacts going to linger on the platform version after version for more time to come? So this brings me to the heart of what I wanted to talk about. Nothing in technology lasts forever, and change is inevitable. So I wanted to explore the question of when Fred's last business rule will execute on an instance. Will there ever be a ServiceNow instance that doesn't run a business rule or client script that was written by Fred? And if we take this concept a step further, we can ask, what would the world look like when the last instance is shut down? There is a famous thought experiment called the Ship of Theseus. If you take a ship and replace it plank by plank, nail by nail, until every part has been swapped out, is it still the same ship? Or has it become something entirely new? That's a good metaphor for ServiceNow. Over time, pieces of the platform do get replaced. Workflows, for example, are on the way out, the reporting engine too, CMS and JellyScript. Despite this, ServiceNow makes an effort to maintain compatibility with these features, even when the technology is superseded. So, therefore, in the near term, we're unlikely to see a full Ship of Theseus moment where every part has been swapped out. But long term, if the platform lasts long enough, perhaps piece by piece, the ServiceNow that we know today could be completely replaced, until one day we might ask, is it even the same thing? Is this the same platform? Another thing that could happen to something like ServiceNow and is an ever-present risk to technology is that of obsolescence. There is plenty of precedent for technology disappearing from the market. Think about once ubiquitous giants in this space like Lotus Notes or Novell. They were huge and dominant in big organizations, and now it's a rare treat indeed to see them in an enterprise. There are other products which led their respective markets, which are almost never seen in the wild in their original form, having been subsumed into larger products. Think PeopleSoft, which is now almost completely incorporated into the Oracle stack as part of a larger suite. And sometimes we don't even see a clean death. Skype, for example, was merged with the Microsoft Teams product line. It was quite messy, and eventually Skype was retired. When we talk about traditional software, there's a time that the installation files or disks just simply stop being sold and shipped once the product has run its course. Sometimes this takes years before the last hardware running the software finally gets decommissioned. If we think about the mainframe software that to this day still runs many of our financial institutions. And for SaaS products, newer paradigm in the market, they can have long protracted shutdown and migration periods as contracts expire and replacement products are prepared. So there's many different potential fates for the end of a software product. And several of these might befall a platform like ServiceNow, but it's hard for us to imagine what that might look like. But we do have examples of patterns that we've seen play out like this in the past. Now, I personally have a saying, I use this quite a lot, that on a long enough time frame, every technical decision that you make becomes technical debt. It doesn't matter how well suited the technology was at the time of the decision. Given enough time or changes in technology trends, changes in personnel or poor maintenance, eventually the technical decision that you've made will no longer be fit for purpose. And that's true even of ServiceNow itself. Buying ServiceNow is or was a decision, maybe will be a decision. And one day that decision will become technical debt as well. The question is, how long will it take and what will come afterwards? Let's imagine a possible timeline for the future of ServiceNow. So here we are now. We're already starting to see the end of familiar features. We mentioned this before. Workflows, content management system, UI 16, the old reporting engine. They're all being replaced with newer versions, things like Flow Designer, Next Experience, and Platform Analytics. The technology is changing, but the underlying concepts still remain familiar. The platform remains what we expected. It's still ServiceNow. However, maybe the next thing to go is the concept of forms itself. What if AI can build and present data dynamically instead of a rigid designed UI that somebody has had to code? You just ask and the right information appears in context. Could happen. Following on from that, if forms disappear, maybe workflows will too. Imagine a world where structured, predefined, built processes aren't needed because everything is handled on demand, dynamically generated in the moment. Do we still need business analysts in a world like that? Is the very concept of a process still relevant? And if ServiceNow isn't a forms-based workflow system anymore, is it still ServiceNow? If we look even further out, what happens to tables? Could the very idea of a structured database give way to something a bit more fluid? A kind of institutional memory that's emergent, intuitive, and stored in an AI brain the same way humans store and recall information. If we keep zooming out, we come to the heat death of the universe, hopefully a long way away. But at some point between now and then, the heat death of the universe, the very last ServiceNow instance, or whatever ServiceNow has evolved into in that time, will shut down. Or maybe ServiceNow is still there to run the PIR on the end of existence. So, what lessons can mere developers take from all of this in our day-to-day work? We need to remember that our work is impermanent. If you've been in the ecosystem for any amount of time, you'll probably have experienced this, where a piece of work that you've done has been recreated by ServiceNow or superseded by a new product line. Think about things like workflow. How many hours did we spend building workflows? They're already being deprecated for Flow Designer. I mentioned before CMS pages with JellyScript. They're mostly irrelevant and hardly touched in the face of not only Service Portal, but also UI Builder. That's two significant replacement UI frameworks in the life of the product. Even business rules, the backbone of so many solutions, can often be swapped out for flows in a lot of cases, although many of us would be reluctant to do so. The point isn't to be wistful for the good old days, but to recognize that this is normal. The work that we pour ourselves into today will become obsolete, and that's okay. So don't cling too tightly. The platform is going to outlive almost everything that we do on it and possibly even outlive our careers. Given the impermanence of our work, we can do things to be good citizens and reduce the impact of our inevitable technical debt. Design for change means designing for removal. So consider things that can be removed. Build with kill switches and rollback positions. Keep your logic clearly separated. Script includes APIs, subflows, so we can swap implementation methods more easily, ensuring abstraction and modularity. Keep track of the things that need to be fixed. Software is not written once, but it's maintained. If you see or create something which will need to be fixed in future, put it in the backlog. More importantly, document not only your solutions, but the decisions and rationales so that those who come after you will understand the purpose and intent. We don't know when our technical debt will become due, so try to prepare for this upfront so that the price eventually is easier to pay. Let me leave you with a final thought. One day, Fred's last business rule will run. Maybe it will be part of a Ship of Theseus moment when the business rule engine itself gets replaced with something better. Maybe Fred's rule will be superseded quietly during some future upgrade, but will still sit dormant, never running, but always remaining on every instance as an artifact of the platform's evolution. Or Fred's code might stop working on hundreds of thousands of instances simultaneously when all customers are moved across to a completely new replacement system. Perhaps there's a lone on-premise instance that remains running decades after ServiceNow, the company, eventually ceases to exist, which is eventually shut down by the last remaining ServiceNow admin, and the lights go out on the last surviving ServiceNow code written directly by Fred Luddy. It's impossible to know what the future holds, but one thing is for sure, someday Fred's last business rule will run. Maybe no one will even notice exactly when it happens, but that will be the day that the technical debt created when Fred wrote that rule more than 20 years ago will finally be paid off. I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all on the day that they approve the change request to shut down the very last ServiceNow instance. Cool. Thanks, everyone. That's my talk. I've got a minute, so I'm just going to read through comments. Chuck has invited me to dance on his grave that day. Chuck, I'm sure you'll be there. All right. Look, thanks, everybody. Appreciate you watching my talk, and enjoy the remainder of the conference. Thank you. See you, everybody.